Hello, VvolfVirgil here. Today we're going to be debunking Adam Something's video on the fatal flaw of free market capitalism. Now, this video is so chock full of logical fallacies, inconsistencies, and presuppositions that it's honestly laughable. Anybody to the right of Karl Marx or has any brains could see why this video is so bad, and it seems like he's just trying to score good boy points within the framework of his leftist echo chamber. Seriously, how did this video get 800,000 or more views? How did this guy get 400,000 subscribers? Let's check it out, shall we?
Imagine suffering a plane crash above the ocean with only you and one other passenger surviving. Both of you get washed up on a deserted island with nothing but sandbanks and palm trees. Once you wake up on the shore and look around, you notice the other survivor's footprints. Looks like he woke up before you. As you explore the island, you find him sitting on a huge pile of coconuts. Turns out, while you were unconscious, he went around and collected every single coconut on the island for himself. Coconuts that you would also need if you don't want to starve. Of course, you could go and try your luck catching some fish along the shore, but according to statistics, 9 out of 10 starved fishermen end up dying of hunger in the end. The coconuts are your only realistic chance at survival. So you ask him, can you give me some coconuts, please? And he says, sure, I can give you some coconuts. If you suck my dick. You are faced with a conundrum. Do you suck the coconut man's dick? Let's keep this question in mind for later.
Wow, a minute in and we already have a straw man. This is such an abstract reduction of real life that it loses any kind of real meaning or context. It starts off by assuming the existence of a monopoly, and then only one natural resource. In a true free market, or any true civilization for that matter, there are many natural resources, and one person doesn't own all of them. In free market, there are many people with many types of possible labor, almost none of which involves sex. You can even work for yourself, since competition, no taxation, and lack of monopoly could allow you to grow your own food. In true capitalism, you could plant a coconut and then just grow your own and sell them to other people, since there aren't just two people like in your isolated example. This example is so restrictive and reductive that it misses almost all of the point. Resources would not be nearly this centralized without government intervention, and work for survival is just a fact of life. If anything, taking a job for this man would be optimal to having to live a caveman's life, and competition would give you the highest wages for the lowest working hours possible. Upward mobility is real, and this example assumes the monopoly is a sort of gotcha move. It's funny how this is almost exactly what ANCAPs and libertarians compare the state to. The state is a monopoly that seizes all sectors of society and then forces you to pay for it.
My political views, and consequently my urban planning and transit views, are all informed by one overarching value. I want as many people as possible to live the best lives they can with the largest possible degree of freedom.
Yep, I agree with this 100%, and that's exactly what I want. Yet we come to radically different conclusions. Maybe it's because you prefer the state and the use of force, and I don't.
Practice, this means that every adult person should be free to do whatever they want as long as they don't harm others physically, mentally, or financially. And just to clarify, I am pro-choice. I don't think the fetus is a full-fledged person, so the mother's interests should take priority.
Ha! Nice virtue signaling. Gotta let your echo chamber audience know that you support abortion. I support the current thing.
So as a freedom-loving person, it should be self-explanatory that I support ideologies such as free market capitalism or even anarcho-capitalism, right? So what do these two ideologies entail? In a free market capitalist system, the economy operates with very little to no government intervention. Now keep in mind that we're only talking about the markets here. In every other aspect of life, the government can be very much repressive. For example, even totalitarian dictatorships can be free market.
This doesn't usually happen though, since most repressive governments will try to seize the economy to help fund themselves and gain further control of their citizens. Most fascists prefer corporatist economies, and most commies just want to do away with capitalism altogether, so this scenario would be pretty rare for dictatorship and totalitarianism as a whole.
or at least lean towards it. In contrast, anarcho-capitalism is a system without a government, or at least a centralized institution able to effect coercion on you. Everything is left up to the free market and the people's self-organization. And I'm here to make the case that within a short amount of time, both systems would devolve into a horrifying authoritarian dictatorship. But how come these two ideologies would bring about the exact things they are designed to alleviate?
Let's see his reasoning to how under pure voluntary exchange and hierarchy, we can have enough consent of the governed to be forcibly stolen from in taxes, and have every freedom stripped away with every law passed.
Namely oppression and coercion. Let's take a look first at free market capitalism. And my question to you is your workplace democratic?
No. And it doesn't need to be democratic either.
And by that I mean, do you as an employee have a say in how your workplace is run? Well, not really, right? Maybe in like a very small business, but even then you don't have any say in the meaningful decisions. Like if there's, say, 5 of you working at a small restaurant as waiters, you can ask the owner to, for example, rearrange the tables a bit, because right now the layout is super inconvenient to navigate with a bunch of plates in your hand, but the outcome of that request is still completely determined by the goodwill of the owner. They can say, yeah, sure, how did you want to organize the tables? Or, nope, sorry, the layout is good the way it is. And for me, this is like a little chiefdom, if you will. It's a small community, you got the chief running things, and everyone can just go and petition the chief personally if they want to. But see, the outcome of the request is still determined completely by the chieftain. Even if all 5 of you go to them and say, so here's a petition, all 5 of us have voted to rearrange the table layout, the chieftain can still go, yeah, I disagree with that, so too bad.
Well, it would be in the best interest of the boss to have a table layout that would make the workers' jobs as easy as possible, since easier work would increase productivity. The boss is in no way obligated to do this though, since changing any aspect of his business could impact his consumers' reception to his business. If his workers are slaving so hard to get around the tables, I doubt the consumers would appreciate seeing that anyway. Workplaces aren't built in the interest of just workers. It's a balance of attracting the most workers and having enough productivity to satisfy consumers. Democracy isn't an inherently good thing anyway, even in this example. If the boss is trying so hard not to change the table layout, it's likely out of a logistical, monetary, or even just out of human psychology associated with table layouts, since different layouts leave different impressions. If the workers democratize in this scenario and change the tables, they may impact their productivity and jeopardize the business that the boss himself created. The boss has every right to call whatever shots he wants, and if they're bad, he'll know whenever he sees his loss in profits. You make no moral or ethical case to why there should be workplace democratization. Bosses doing what they want with their company is inherently bad to you, I guess.
We end up with a system where the will of the people will be taken into account if, and only if, A, the leader is a nice person, B, the leader is afraid that some of the subordinates might quit and so they would need to spend more time and money on additional recruitment, or C, the leader believes that the new table arrangement would lead to more efficient work and so the business would make more money.
I love how you treat the will of the worker as if it's this divine thing that supersedes any other aspect of business.
So here, whether the will of the people will be taken into account depends on A, personal kindness, B, fear of losing money, and C, the promise of more money. So as you can see, this is not exactly the perfect recipe for freedom. So what happens in a bigger business with more employees? Big business takes the concept of chiefdom and upgrades it to a totalitarian dictatorship. As Bob Black wrote in his essay The Abolition of Work, work makes a mockery of freedom. The official line is that we all have rights and live in a democracy. Other unfortunates who aren't free like we are forced to live in police states. These victims obey orders or else, no matter how arbitrary. The authorities keep them under regular surveillance. State bureaucrats control even the smaller details of everyday life. The officials who push them around are answerable only to higher-ups, public or private. Either way, dissent and disobedience are punished. Informers report regularly to the authorities. All this is supposed to be a very bad thing, and so it is, although it is nothing but a description of the modern workplace.
This type of system is only truly possible under monopoly, where there is no one else to work for except for a single set of corporations cemented by the government, and work conditions stay stagnant because of no competition. People progress past the farming lifestyles of old and past factory sweatshops because economies aren't zero-sum, and the lower class gains economic mobility over time. I would agree that under a corporatist or crony capitalist system that this is true, but you aren't forced to work for a big business under the true free market. I love how this is supposed to be an example of the free market, but even this quote mentions state bureaucrats.
Proponents of free market capitalism usually bring up the fact that the workers can just switch workplaces or, just move to another city. This is the freedom that workers have.
This is a straw man argument. That's not entirely what we advocate. Yes, you can switch workplaces, but it's highly unlikely in most places under the free market that moving cities would be necessary, unless you have very specialized work. For example, in fast food. In many towns, there are multiple competing chains such as Burger King, McDonald's, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, Wendy's, and most definitely there will be more under the free market without any monopolies. You conveniently ignore that one can accrue enough capital to start their own business under the free market, as no monopolies could keep you from doing so, and there will be no government to regulate you out of existence for trying to do so.
But is it though? Changing your workplace is not an easy thing to do. I know because I've done it before. It's long, time-consuming, financially difficult. Chances are you'll be without a salary for at least a month. Not to mention how stressful it can be. Not to mention, the older you get, the more difficult it will become to get hired. I know people personally who tried to change their jobs in their mid-40s. Despite them being super qualified with ton of experience, in a booming job market, it was still super difficult.
Says who exactly? No logic, nothing cited, just pure anecdotal evidence. I thought most people would plan out their next career choice before leaving their current job. It's not a good idea to have no income to fall back on before leaving.
Also, what if there's nothing for you to do in your area? What if you live in some small town in some flyover state with like one Walmart and 2 other workplaces?
These are very extreme and specific examples based on anecdotal evidence without logic. Most likely this type of thing could be an issue if you have a very specialized career choice, but you really can just move if you live in a rural area. Or you could just go into something like agriculture for rural places. How do you think people live in rural places anyway? We have jobs here like anyone else. And if there's a demand for work anywhere, the free market will supply.
You want to quit your current job because your employer wants to cut your salary to $5 per hour and increase your work hours to 16 hours per day. Because under free market capitalism, they are allowed to do that.
No, they can't reasonably do that, for the same exact reasons you cited earlier. Harder working conditions would demand a substantial increase in pay in a normal economy. That's why a miner or a surgeon makes more money than a grocery stocker. Better working conditions would be in favor of the employer, as that results in higher productivity for easy work, and doing something like that would make any business with easier conditions far more appealing to your employees. If your employer could give you easing conditions and then change them later, I bet someone can give you what your boss used to, as there would be a demand from your part, and the parts of every other worker that works for your boss also.
Trust me, there's a lot of things corporations would do under a free market system, like violating your privacy online or offline, or selling off your sensitive information for money.
The state and the NSA does this all the time, yet you advocate for larger government. Businesses do monitor online activity of their employees, but only to make sure to hire people who won't give them a bad image for hiring them. And besides, companies already share your information and sell it. The government already does that, and they do it for advertising reasons, and there isn't some kind of apocalypse. And if I had my privacy truly violated and then sold, I would most definitely try to sue them in a private court for violating my right to privacy and personal autonomy.
Speaking of which, today's video is sponsored by Atlas VPN.
You criticize capitalism and then advertise. Nothing even slightly contradictory there.
According to proponents of free market capitalism, if you are out of options, your main recourse is just to move to a different city. Now, of course, this can be a fine solution, but we cannot ignore just how destructive it can also be. Moving to a new area can be hugely stressful. I know because I've done it before. Not to mention, if you move from some flyover state to, say, a coastal state, you'll be leaving behind friends, family, acquaintances, i.e. you will lose your social safety net and you will lose your community. And this is made all the worse if you have, say, school-age children. You have to take them with you. That means leaving behind their school, their friends, hell, even maybe their boyfriends or girlfriends, the teachers they knew, the neighborhood they grew up in, maybe even the grandparents or other relatives who also live there. Now, I'm no child psychology expert, but I don't think for some reason that that's particularly conducive for the child's development. The only group of people who would not be affected by the negative consequences of moving that much would be young adults between the ages of 18 and 25, who are hyper online, don't leave the house that often, and have very few to no real-life friends.
Under the current system we have, you still have to move to different places to get a job if you have a specialized occupation. People still have to move to get work under socialism. Also, this argument is incredibly appealing to emotion. Think about the children!
And so let us now talk about anarcho-capitalism and what its proponents want to bring about. And so, as we discussed before, free market capitalism doesn't want government influence in the market. However, the state can be very much present in other aspects of life. For example, they can still provide public services and infrastructure next to the private ones. Anarcho-capitalism, however, in its primal form, is a stateless society. There is no government. Everything depends on people's self-organization and the free market. All the functions that were performed by the government previously are now completely privatized, meaning you could live on your private property and freely contract with anyone else without any coercion, as long as they basically just don't mess with other people, also called the non-aggression principle.
Yep, and this is also exactly what I believe. And this is the most logical conclusion to every problem you've mentioned that's been a problem of the state.
This means that technically you would be able to live a life of absolute freedom. Well, until the Amazon Gestapo shows up and tells you that you are now under the rule of holy Jeff Bezos I, and anyone opposing him will be decapitated in an Amazon warehouse, and their body parts will be sent to their family members as a warning in boxes with same-day Amazon Prime delivery. But hey, if you don't agree with this, you'll be perfectly free to start reciting the non-aggression principle until the firing squad officer tells you to shut the fuck up and keep digging.
This, no matter how or which way you slice it, is a 100% pure and undiluted by any rational reasoning, logical fallacy. This is a straw man to the extreme, appeals to ridicule and emotion, and assumes a logical conclusion to anarcho-capitalism without any logical processing to support it. So, number 1, most weaponry would be completely illegal and decriminalized under anarcho-capitalism, as there would be no state to enforce regulation. So if the Amazon Gestapo showed up, I would have every right to defend myself with an M32 rotary grenade launcher, and so would every one of my neighbors. A society like this would be a nearly impossible venture to conquer. Number 2, everyone would easily know if they were conspiring to take everything over, because gun manufacturers can easily see mass orders from Amazon, and they would have to be getting people from somewhere if they tried to form the Gestapo anyway. If I was a news organization, this information would sell massively on a headline. Number 3, the centralization of power and wealth to such a degree that Amazon currently has cannot happen without the monopolization of force and power that the state reinforces corporations like Amazon with currently. So the amount of power and wealth they would have would be distributed across many different companies, as the free market would allow the highest degree of competition. There is literally no argument here, and all we see is just an even more dumbed-down variation of the common what about the warlord's objection to anarcho-capitalism and libertarianism.
So I believe by now all of us can start seeing the problem, the fatal flaw at the core of free market capitalism, and consequently anarcho-capitalism. Both ideologies seek to increase the power and influence of institutions that are autocratic in nature. Traditional corporations are set up like dictatorships. The owner has absolute control, and the subordinates can only hold the owner accountable through a government, which in the first world is a parallel, democratic, more powerful power structure.
Oh, sweet, sweet irony. Corporations are coercive, so let's use more coercion from the government to fix it. That's what your logic is boiling down to right now. Well, first of all, corporations themselves are a product of governmental monopoly. They would not exist without the power they get from the state. But now you have to ask yourself, without the state, where do companies get their power from? The only way that a company can get any amount of money is by supplying a product that people demand, and then selling and producing it at a cheap enough price for consumers to afford. They cannot coerce you because they gain all their power from you and are obligated to appease you to stay in business. Companies will compete for the best working conditions, as that is in the best interest of the worker itself. The state, on the other hand, is built on a monopoly of coercion and theft, and yet they still have the consent of the governed. Why? Because politicians have a monolithic machine behind them from monopoly that can't be undone, while companies don't. You give bureaucrats and politicians the power of the military, and yet you expect them to serve your interests, even though they're self-serving humans just like you are. Companies simply don't have the means to coerce you, because they don't have the centralized power, money, and influence that the state does from taxing you. Companies have to treat you well, or you won't buy from them, and you won't give them power. The state is what coerces you and robs you through taxation, yet you want to increase its size. How do you justify the use of taxation and coercion from the state to fight your supposed coercion from corporations, even though the state creates these corporations? Something seems faulty with your logic here. Also, democracy is a terrible form of ruling on mass government. Taking the monopoly of power from the state and putting it into majority rule is a very bad idea. There's a reason the Weimar Republic turned to Hitler. Populism backed by authority only given by the state will always take hold whenever things inevitably go south. You always say that because bosses and companies are autocratic, therefore society will devolve into autocracy. How? They have no ability to pass laws, they can't violate the non-aggression principle, and support an authoritarian regime through taxation, so they have no real power outside of the inner workings of their business. If you have a problem with their conduct, you just break your contractual agreement and leave. It seems like you're projecting the state onto capitalism in these scenarios.
And so it can hold the corporate autocratic power structures accountable. If you get rid of it, then the only game remaining in town will be the autocratic power structures, meaning they'll be the ones with ultimate control. In free market capitalism, they'll control the economy, and who knows, maybe more things by proxy, and in anarcho-capitalism, they'll control everything. And guess what? Coercion happens to be the central part of any autocracy. So if your goal is the lack of coercion, then free market capitalism or anarcho-capitalism should be the last things you would want. And I'm confident in making this statement because coercion already exists in the current system, and it's not coming from the government. If your only choice is to work some shitty job or be homeless, as is the case for millions of people, then I would say you are not really free.
You have to ask yourself many questions about, if you have to work a shitty job or be homeless, how are you free? Well, first of all, I want to ask you what you think about these questions. If you have to do shitty work like hunting and gathering or starve in nature, how are you free? Or, if you have to work for the socialist or communist collective or die, how are you free? This doesn't appear to be a problem inherent with capitalism when taken to its logical conclusion, but rather a problem inherent in the existence of humanity and our biological needs. The logical conclusion here is that we aren't free because nature itself is oppressive, since we have to do some sort of labor to stay alive. Capitalism is most definitely the best alternative and utilization of this, because after working enough, you yourself can become the employer and retire from having to continuously labor while also creating output. Nearly 68% of the world's richest people are self-made. Not only that, but capitalism keeps us alive by actively improving the output of society, since that's what all jobs are. You also never define the word freedom. What is freedom in your view? If having to work isn't freedom, then would that mean that people are entitled to not work, even though our biology states that we must, and somebody has to do the terrible and laborious jobs anyway, and capitalism allows you to afford luxuries with terrible and laborious jobs? Also, this is a false dichotomy. There are alternatives such as investing, building a business, saving up money or wealth, getting an education, and the like, which can prevent you from having to get menial labor jobs for very long. The government is what supports wage stagnation through monopoly, not the free market.
I mean, hey, you do have the option to quit and be homeless, but is that really the type of freedom you would want?
And what's the alternative other than the free market, which allows the highest upward mobility? How will removing the ability to voluntarily exchange labor fix biological needs and give people homes in a way that doesn't require them to exchange any kind of labor that you would find meaningless?
And so let us now circle back to the original question. Do you suck the coconut man's dick? Hey, you're free not to, with dying of hunger as the consequence. And that I believe to be coercion. If you want a system with the maximum possible amount of freedom and the minimum possible amount of coercion, then, if I were you, I would not base it on the current form of capitalism, a system that is autocratic in nature. But I do think there is a solution actually, namely workplace democracy. Give workers more control over their own workplace.
So, everything you blame capitalism for, how will instituting workplace democracy prevent any of the problems you mentioned? People will still have to move places if they don't think that their democracy or the conditions of their work suits them. Democracies will soon learn that they will have to sacrifice comfort if they want to meet productivity or fulfill market needs. the state will still be autocratic and create monopoly, and you'll still have to work in a setting of democracy to not starve or go homeless anyway. This was my first debunk of Atom Something, so I really hoped you liked it. If you have any suggestions for my content, how I can improve it, or my future videos, please give them to me. I would really want them. Please consider subscribing if you did. If you have any thoughts, leave a comment, since I'm a very small channel, and I put a ton of effort into my videos. Thank you guys very much, and please subscribe. Thank you for watching this video.